Hi, it's Mrs. Wolbrin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, guys, it's Mrs. Klein. We're here with the second podcast for Lesson 22, all about the Civil War.
Yep, we have the same guiding question. What factors and events influenced the outcome of the Civil War? And today we're going to start with Gettysburg.
Yep, Section 4.
Yep, so we've got like a turning point at Gettysburg. And while neither side, we left off with Antietam.
Yes, we did.
While neither side won the Battle of Antietam, it was enough of a victory for Lincoln to take his first steps toward ending slavery. When the Civil War began, Lincoln had resisted pleas from abolitionists to make emancipation or the freeing of slaves a reason for fighting the Confederacy. He himself opposed slavery, but the purpose of the war, he said, is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery.
All right, so the Emancipation Proclamation. As the war dragged on, Lincoln changed his mind and decided to make abolition a goal of the Union. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation, or formal order, declared slaves in all Confederate states to be free. The Declaration of Independence had said that all men are created equal, and now the fight was about living up to those words.
Yeah. Okay, the Battle of Gettysburg. In the summer of 1863, Lee felt confident enough to risk another invasion of the North. He hoped to capture a northern city and help convince the wary North to seek peace. Union and Confederate troops met on July 1st, 1863, west of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
All right, the following day, the Confederates attempted to find weak spots in the Union position, but the Union lines held firm. On the third day, Lee ordered an all-out attack on the center of the Union line. George Pickett led 15,000 Confederate soldiers in a charge across the low ground separating the two forces.
Yeah, Pickett's charge marked the northernmost point reached by Southern troops during the war. However, as Confederate troops pressed forward, Union gunners opened great holes in their advancing lines. Although Gettysburg was a victory for the Union, the losses on both sides were staggering. More than 17,500 Union soldiers and 23,000 Confederate troops were killed or wounded in the 3 days of battle.
Wow, that's remarkable amount of loss. All right, moving on to opposition on the Union home front. All right, despite the victory at Gettysburg, Lincoln faced a number of problems on the home front. A group of Northern Democrats were more interested in restoring peace than in saving the Union or ending slavery.
Yeah. Other Northerners opposed the war because they were sympathetic to the Confederate cause. When a pro-slavery mob attacked Union soldiers marching through Maryland, Lincoln sent in troops to maintain order. He also used his constitutional power to temporarily suspend the right of habeas corpus. During the national emergency, citizens no longer had the right to appear before court to face charges, and people who were suspected of disloyalty were jailed without being charged for a crime.
Wow. Okay, so that's not going to sit right with some people. All right, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. In 1863, President Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg. Lincoln was among those invited to speak at the dedication of this new burial ground. The nation would never forget Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
The president deliberately spoke of the war in words that echoed the Declaration of Independence. The world can never forget what they did here. Finally, he called on Americans to remain dedicated to the great task remaining before us. And these are actual words.
Yes, they are.
The Gettysburg Address, guys. Okay. That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Okay. All right, now the war continues. It's still not over. We're going to talk about what happens in the city of Vicksburg in the South. All right, the Civil War was a war of many technological firsts. It was the first American war to use railroads to move troops and to keep them supplied. It was the first war in which telegraphs were used to communicate with distant armies, and it was the first conflict to be recorded in photographs. I've talked about that in my class, which is pretty impressive, all right? It was also the first to see combat between armor-plated steamships.
Yeah, the Merrimack and the Monitor. Early in the war, Union forces withdrew from the Navy Yard in Norfolk, Virginia, but they left behind a warship, the Merrimack. The Confederacy, which began the war with no navy, covered the wooden Merrimac with iron plates and added a powerful ram to its prow.
All right, in response, the Union Navy built its own ironclad ship called the Monitor in less than 100 days. The Battle of the Merrimac and the Monitor demonstrated that ironclad ships were superior to wooden vessels, so both sides started adding ironclads to their navies.
Yeah. Now let's talk about control of the Mississippi. Ironclads were part of the Union's campaign to divide the South by taking control of the Mississippi River. The Union now controlled both ends of the Mississippi, which prevented the South from moving men and supplies up and down the river. However, the North was similarly unable to move along the river as long as the Confederates continued to control one key location, Vicksburg, Mississippi.
Sorry, Vicksburg. All right. Located on a bluff overlooking a hairpin turn in the Mississippi River, the town of Vicksburg was easy to defend and difficult to capture because they're high up high, right? That's a good, strategically important position. In May of 1863, General Ulysses S. Grant battled his way to Vicksburg with the needed army, and for 6 weeks, Union gunboats shelled the city from the river while Grant's army bombarded it from land.
Yeah. As shells pounded the city, people in Vicksburg dug caves into the hillsides for protection. To survive, they ate horses, mules, and bread made of corn and dried peas. Low on food and supplies, Vicksburg surrendered on July 4th, 1863. The Mississippi was now a Union waterway, and the Confederacy was divided in two.
Okay, so part of their strategy is working now with this Anaconda strategy. All right, problems on the Confederate home front. As the war raged on, life in the South became grim. Unable to sell their tobacco and cotton to the North or to other countries, farmers planted food crops instead. Still, the South was often hungry. Invading Union armies destroyed crops and cut rail lines.
Yeah. As the clothing wore out, Southerners made do with patches and homespun cloth. In 1864, Southerners were writing letters like the one to soldiers on the battlefront. We haven't got nothing in the house to eat but a little bit of meal. I don't want you to stop
fighting them Yankees.
Yeah,
but try to get off and come home and fix us all up some. Many soldiers found it difficult to resist such pleas, even if going home meant deserting their units.
Yeah.
So their families at home are saying, we need you to come on home.
We need you to come home.
Okay.
All right, guys. Fort Wagner, African Americans in the war. Early in the war, abolitionists had urged Congress to recruit African Americans for the Army. Congress finally opened the door to Black recruits in 1862.
All right, Massachusetts is one of the first states to organize Black regiments. The most famous was the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, commanded by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. 2 of the 54th's Infantry's 1,000 soldiers were sons of Frederick Douglass.
That's really cool.
Yep.
The men of the Massachusetts 54th were paid less than the white soldiers. At Lincoln's urging, Congress finally granted Black soldiers equal pay. After 3 months of training, the Massachusetts 54th was sent to South Carolina to participate in an attack on Fort Wagner outside of Charleston.
All right, the assault on Fort Wagner was an impossible mission. To reach the fort, troops had to cross 200 yards of open, sandy beach as rifle and cannon fire poured down on them. After losing nearly half of their men, the survivors of the 54th Regiment retreated, but their bravery won them widespread respect.
Yeah. Black soldiers often received little training and poor equipment. They also risked death or enslavement if captured. Still, African Americans fought with great courage to save the Union.
All right, now we've got Appomattox. The total war brings an end. All right, during the first years of the war, Lincoln had searched for a commander who was willing to fight to fight the Confederates. The president finally found the leader he needed in General Grant, whom he made commander of the Union forces in March of 1864. Grant's views on war were quite straightforward. The art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is, get at him as soon as you can, strike at him as hard as you can and often as you can, and keep moving on.
Yeah. He would lead a large force against Lee to capture Richmond. And at the same time, General William Tecumseh Sherman would lead a second army into Georgia and capture Atlanta. Grant invades Virginia. In May 1864, General Grant invaded Virginia with a force of more than 100,000 men and met Lee's army of 60,000 in a dense forest known as the Wilderness.
By the time the two forces reached Petersburg, a railroad center 20 miles south of Richmond, Grant's Grant's losses almost equals Lee's entire army. Holy crap, that's a lot of people. However, Grant was able to reinforce his army with fresh troops, whereas Lee, who had also suffered heavy losses, could not.
Yeah. Grant believed in total war on the enemy's will to fight and its ability to support an army. In May 1864, General Sherman left Tennessee for Georgia with orders to inflict all the damage you can against their war resources.
All right. In the middle of all of this, there's a presidential election and the re-election of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
All right. Any hope of victory for the South lay in the defeat of President Lincoln in the election of 1864. Lincoln actually doubted that he would win re-election. Luckily for the president, Sheridan's destruction of the Shenandoah Valley and Sherman's capture of Atlanta occurred just in time to rescue his campaign. In November, Lincoln was reelected.
Yeah. All right. Sherman's march through Georgia. After burning Atlanta, Sherman marched his army across the state towards Savannah, promising to make Georgia howl. As they marched through Georgia, Sherman's troops destroyed everything of value that they found. In December 1864, Sherman captured Savannah, Georgia, and from there he turned north and destroyed all opposition in the Carolinas.
All right, finally, the war ends. For 9 months, Grant's forces battered Lee's army at Petersburg, the gateway to Richmond. On April 1st, 1865, the Union forces finally broke through Confederate lines to capture the city, and Union troops marched into Richmond 2 days later.
Yeah. On April 9th, 1865, General Lee, in full dress uniform, arrived at Wilmer McLean's house in the village of Appomattox Courthouse. Okay.
Appomattox Courthouse.
Thank you.
Yep.
He was there to surrender his army to General Grant, who met him in a mud-splattered and crumpled uniform.
All right. Grant's terms of surrender were generous and enabled Confederate soldiers to go home if they promised to continue the fighting. And Lee accepted the terms.
Yeah. No one who fought in the Civil War would ever forget the intensity of the experience. The nation, too, had been touched by fire, with many comparing the Civil War to a great furnace that had burned away one country and forged a new one in its place.
Before the war, Americans tended to say the United States are, but after the war, they said the United States is. These momentous changes came at a horrifying cost. Billions of dollars had been spent on the conflict, with more than 620,000 Union and Confederate soldiers dead. Almost every family had lost a member or a friend.
Yeah, it would take generations for the South to recover from the environmental destruction wrought by the war. As devastating as it was, the Civil War left many issues unsettled. Secession and slavery were gone, but conflicts over states' rights and the status of African Americans would continue long into the future.
All right, you guys, take care.
Yep, see you later.